My name is Chris Furlong, and I'm your host for Caffe Conversations. Today's guest is Brian, currently residing in Linfield, and this week's show topic is A Brush with Mortality. So, Brian, before we get to your story, please tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town on the New Hampshire border called Dracut.
And what do you currently do for a living?
Currently manage a global reception team for a global law firm.
Excellent, thank you. And how do you take your coffee?
I order an Americano, decaffeinated with a splash of half and half, preferably iced.
Very good. So please tell us, what brings you to Caffe Nero Conversations today?
So today I'd like to tell the story of my brush with mortality and how I almost died skydiving.
Please tell.
So let's go back to 1997, I believe. I just graduated high school, and I had heard, maybe on a radio station or somewhere, about these opportunities to go skydiving up at an airport in Pepperell, Massachusetts, which wasn't too far from where I lived. So the first time I went skydiving, the way that they do it, it's called a tandem skydive. So it really doesn't require any sort of skill or training on your part. You watch a few training videos, you sign your life away, and you meet your instructor and your videographer, and they're going to go through the next steps for how the skydive is going to work. You get suited up, you get your equipment, and jump into this tiny little Cessna plane, go up to 11,000 feet. You get the signal, the instructor straps himself into you, so they're behind you. They open the plane door, and it's a sound that you just can't imagine at 11,000 feet how loud and how windy it is. And I'll never forget the instructor telling me to step out onto a little ledge on the outside of the plane. You put your foot out on the ledge, and the plane's probably going, I'm guessing, maybe anywhere from 80. Right hand on the bar, where the hand grip is, you put your left hand. Then the instructor goes out, and then the instructor rips your hand away from that bar because you're holding onto that bar about as tight as you can possibly hold onto this bar without realizing it. He pulls your hands back, and then he rolls out of the airplane, and you tumble and you free fall. And at 11,000 feet, I want to say that we free fell for about, maybe anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. It goes by so fast, and just such a rush of adrenaline, and looking at the ground, sort of getting closer and closer. You pull the chute, and then it's a really nice, gentle ride all the way down to the ground. You have some handles that you use to steer, so you kind of go in a corkscrew motion left and right and work your way down, and then you slide onto the grass and finish off your dive. And so after I had done that, I thought that was just so amazing and was so incredible and such an amazing experience that I thought, I wonder what it would be like to do it by myself. So we'll fast forward about 2 years, and I was, I believe, a sophomore at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, walking to class one day, and I saw a flyer for skydiving lessons. And I thought, well, geez, I've already done it. This is great. And I went to the information session and met a few people and met the instructor. And sure enough, near Amherst, there's a town called Orange. And Orange, Massachusetts has a small airport very similar to the one that that I dove at the first time in Pepperell. So we did these classes for several weeks, and a lot more training and a lot more information. You even do practice, jumping off of like high platforms onto the ground to learn how to land, and learn how to, you learn how the parachute is put together. You learn all these different things, and it's really, really fun. And these types of jumps, which I don't believe they do them anymore, but they're called static line jumps. So if you've ever seen a video of soldiers jumping out of airplanes, they have a line that attaches from their parachute to the plane, right? You've seen this before.
Of course, yep.
So they put it, either hook it into a wire or they hook it somewhere on the plane. You jump out of the plane, and it automatically deploys your parachute. And basically, at the time, this was sort of the introductory way to start learning how to skydive before you were equipped enough to start doing free fall skydiving. So I thought, all right, well, this will be fun. And it was really a good way to maybe pursue a hobby that I thought would be mine for, who knew, decades to come. So after the training was completed, we did our first dive, and we went up And it was very much the same thing that I'd remembered from my first dive, which is stand out on the edge of the plane after they open the door. And now this type of jump, they only go up to about 3,000 feet. And I say only. When you're in a plane at 80 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, and you're at 3,000 feet, it's still pretty scary. And for these jumps, because you were by yourself and because it was a static line, one of the things that you had to be careful was, and the instructors warned us about, was that the line itself, they had to make sure that it didn't get tangled or caught on anything. So when you released yourself from the plane, you had to be as far away from the plane as possible, theoretically. So that same bar that I just described to you, you had to grab onto the bar in this case as well, but then you had to let your feet go. And you had to hang from that bar while the plane was moving. And you had to look back into the plane to get the thumbs up from the instructor or whoever was in the plane to let you know, okay, release. So you imagine yourself 3,000 feet above the ground in a small plane traveling, again, 100 miles an hour, however fast that plane goes, and you're just hanging from it, which was an incredible experience. So you get the signal and you release. And the parachute goes off really quick. It's actually kind of an abrupt, bumpy experience because the chute opens right away. And then you kind of go through your checklist of the things that they advise us of in training. Sometimes the parachute gets a little twisted. You untwist it and you grab your handles. You do a quick little turn. And in your helmet, you have an instructor on the ground at the airport who's watching you and giving you instructions for what to do. And now it's only a one-way radio. So I couldn't speak to them.
In a one-way trip.
In a one-way trip, theoretically, hopefully. And so they communicate with you right from the beginning. Hey, let's get started. We're gonna steer you down to the ground. Give me a right turn so that I know you can hear me. So you pull your handle down. Parachute turns and you slide down to the right again as you're losing elevation and heading closer to the ground. Okay, great. We know that you can hear me. How about a left-hand turn? And they're giving you all these instructions for turns, and it's great. And you're cruising down. You get closer and closer and closer, and you pull down both handles. It's called flaring. So you pull down both handles as hard as you can, and it really, I guess for lack of a better term, it puts the brakes on the parachute, and it's what allows you to have a soft landing onto the ground. Either, you can land on 2 feet, or what we were instructed to do was, put your feet together as close as you can and let your kind of ankles almost collapse a bit and fall over onto the ground. So I got to do that twice, and both times perfect scores, did great, couldn't have been any better. So now we'll get to the third time, and this is where my brush with mortality happened. So everything, perfect day, perfect weather. I remember the first couple of dives we had done together with the group. Some of the people in the class, we'd all gone together. But on this particular day, I think I was the only one who decided to go in the morning and get a dive in, because the sooner you got your dives in, the sooner you could progress towards more advanced skydiving, which is what I wanted to do. So I got there early, booked my space, got all my equipment, got everything set up, jumped in the plane, went up, stood out, grabbed the plane, hung from the plane, released, my parachute opened, and now I'm listening to my instructor as I'm getting close to the ground. So what I didn't realize that on this particular day was that the pilot was monitoring the wind. And the pilot, from what I learned later, judged that there was a really strong wind coming from a certain direction, made them decide to drop me in a different spot, assuming that this wind would blow me back into the direction where the landing spot was at the airport. So when the parachute opened and I got my bearings and I started to go down, I realized that below me was a really large, pine tree forest, I guess, for what I can recall. And the person on the ground in the headset was doing the same thing that they normally did, was guide me down and, turn right and turn left. And as I started to get a little bit closer, I started to look at that tree line right at the edge of the airport thinking, okay, they must be taking me over these trees. But every time he asks me to turn, you lose elevation and you get a little bit closer to the ground. And I thought, okay, well, they're the experts. They must know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
I trust it. So turn again. And I said, geez, I'm getting really close to those trees, really, really close. Okay, it's going to be close. I'm going to clear those trees. I'm sure it's going to be fine, but geez, this is close. Okay, you know what? That tree's getting really close. And before I knew it, I started to lift my legs up thinking, okay, I'm going to skim the top of this tree. And then boom, I smashed into this tree. I don't know how fast. I don't really recall much of anything other than when the dust kind of settled and I realized that I still had my arms and legs attached. I was conscious. There was blood somewhere, but I wasn't sure where it was coming from. And my leg had a throbbing pain in it that I thought almost 100% must be broken, but I was alive. And I thought, okay, I'm in this tree and I don't know, I didn't know what was going to happen next because I had no way to communicate to sort of tell anybody that I was okay. And it was probably a good 15 to 20 minutes before the instructors on the ground at the airport were able to locate the tree that I was in with the parachute completely draped over the top of this pine tree. And again, I think the tree was probably a good 75 feet tall and I was just at the top of it. And they came over and they're shouting up to the tree, "Are you okay?" And it was interesting because it was like, I'm not sure if I'm okay. I don't know. I think so, but maybe not. But between the blood and the sap and whatever else pine needles I was covered in, I guess for the most part, I assumed, yeah, I was okay. And they said, okay, well, we're going to work on getting you down. Just hang on. And, and I said, well, how are they going to get me down from this thing? And within about 5 to 10 minutes, I started hearing sirens. And I said, okay, so who did they call and what are they bringing to try to get me down? And then I was able to see on the ground that because of the tree being basically the last tree before the open space of the airport, they were able to bring in a fire truck with one of those really tall ladders on it. So basically the ladder truck. And they positioned the truck and they got somebody up to get me out of the tree and onto the truck because I couldn't move that leg. And so it was really difficult to get out of my gear. So you have to take off the gear to be able to move at all and, move some branches. And again, if I can remember correctly too, there was an instructor or someone who was able to climb the tree to a point where they could communicate with me and get a better sense that I was okay. And so I was able to get onto the ladder and get down and head over in an ambulance to the hospital. And then the next step was notifying my parents that I had been in a skydiving accident, which didn't go over so well. But
my God. That is an incredible story. I've never heard anything like it. And I think did a public service announcement against skydiving. I honestly, I had no idea where this was going, and I couldn't imagine it being any worse than it was, other than a fatality involved. But the thought of you sitting at the top of a 75-foot tree is etched upon my mind from here on in.
In some ways, it's a fun story to tell. It's a little bit disappointing because up to that point in my life, I never really thought about having a fear of heights. And, when you do that kind of thing, sure, there's always a fear in some ways, right? You're on an airplane jumping out, right? There's certainly some type of risk there, but the sense of being in high places and looking down upon things never bothered me. And then to this day, when I go up to high places or tall buildings or anything like that, that memory comes back to some ways to trigger that fear of heights. So I guess I've never considered if I would do skydiving again. I think I feel pretty confident in saying that the 4 times in my life that I've jumped out of a plane are enough, and that's exceeded the quota that I probably should have had. The act of jumping out of a plane, I mean, again, it's such a rush of adrenaline, and it's so exciting, and it's such an amazing thing, right? Because it's about as close as you can get to flying. Being on an airplane, you're so protected from the noise and from everything else. But when you're out there in a parachute jumping, I mean, it's very peaceful and it's very relaxing and it's really exciting. But yeah, I think that may be it for my skydiving career.
I think that perhaps you should go and enjoy your coffee and stay out of planes.
I will do that. Yes. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Caffe Conversations. Check out a new episode daily on Spotify.